Jack Lord's face was a fixture in millions of American homes. His piercing stare, his commanding voice, his immovable sense of justice. As Steve McGarrett, the head of Hawaii Five-O's fictional state police unit, Lord embodied the very essence of strength, stoicism, and authority. But behind the sharp suits and iconic line, Book M. Danno, was a man whose real life told a far more delicate and haunting story. A story shaped not just by ambition and fame, but by loss, secrecy, and an unwavering devotion to love. To the public, Jack Lord was the embodiment of confidence and control. But those closest to him knew a gentler man, one who nursed quiet heartbreaks, who spoke softly of the past, and who guarded his privacy with an almost sacred intensity. While his Hollywood success arrived later in life, the scars of earlier years never quite faded. There was the son he rarely mentioned, the first wife whom history nearly forgot, and the lifelong partnership with Marie Dinard, a woman who gave him not only love, but sanctuary from a world he often kept at arm's length. Even the home he shared with Marie, a stylish, ocean-facing apartment in Honolulu, would become part of the mystery. Left untouched for years after their passing, its quiet abandonment raised questions about the couple's final years. Why did they retreat so fully from the spotlight? What became of Jack's considerable fortune? And how did a man who once commanded every camera slip so silently into obscurity? In the chapters ahead, we'll journey through the life of Jack Lord, not just the television icon, but the man behind the image. We'll trace his early days as a merchant marine and artist, his slow and stubborn climb through the entertainment world, and the painful silence surrounding his first child. We'll uncover the story of his unconventional romance with Marie Dinard and the private world they built, far from the red carpets and flashing bulbs. We'll also explore how, even in death, Jack remained elusive, his memory lovingly protected by the woman who knew him best. This is not the story of a crime-fighting detective. This is the story of Jack Lord, the son, the sailor, the husband, the star. A man whose life, like the tides he once painted, was shaped by deep undercurrents and unspoken truths. Thank you for joining us on this quiet journey through a remarkable life. Next, we begin with his modest Brooklyn beginnings and the artistic passion that first pulled him toward the sea, and eventually the screen. Long before the waves of Hawaii would lap at his doorstep, Jack Lord was a boy from Brooklyn with calloused hands and a heart full of dreams. Born John Joseph Patrick Ryan on December 30th, 1920, he was raised in a working-class family where discipline and duty took precedence over glamour or indulgence. His father, William Ryan, operated a freighting business, and Jack often spent his afternoons assisting with deliveries, stacking boxes, moving goods, and learning the value of honest labor. It was a modest upbringing, one grounded in routine. But young Jack carried within him a flicker of something more. Though the streets of Brooklyn were loud and hurried, Jack found stillness in the act of creation. He loved to sketch, often turning his attention to the sea, its endless horizon, its quiet strength. This fascination grew into a passion for maritime art, and it led him to the United States Merchant Marine Academy at Fort Trumbull. There, he studied marine science, immersing himself in both the technicalities of seafaring and the romanticism of the ocean's vast solitude. To Jack, the sea was both profession and poetry, a calling that blended order and beauty. When World War II broke out, duty called. Jack served with distinction, constructing service bridges in Persia and manning transport vessels that crisscrossed the globe. The war years were transformative, not only for the world but for the young man who would one day be known as Steve McGarrett. He saw destruction, resilience, and the fragility of life. And yet, it was during this period that something unexpected stirred within him. While stationed back at Fort Trumbull after the war, Jack began producing training films for the military. Behind the camera, he discovered something he hadn't expected, a desire to be in front of it. It was a subtle shift, but a decisive one. The artist who once painted oceans began to dream of stages and scripts. Returning home, he pursued formal acting training at the neighborhood playhouse and later at the Actors Studio, where he refined his craft among the serious talents of the day. Broadway was his proving ground. He appeared in The Traveling Lady and The Flowering Peach, and from there, he began to earn supporting roles in film and television. These early years were not glamorous. They were filled with auditions, rejections, and the slow, humbling process of building a name from the ground up. His rugged looks and authoritative presence earned him steady, if unremarkable, work, often as cowboys, soldiers, or lawmen. He made appearances in series like Bonanza, Gunsmoke, and Rawhide, and took on film roles in Project X, Man of the West, and Cry Murder. But the big break remained elusive. For more than a decade, Jack Lord labored quietly in Hollywood's shadow, never losing his discipline, never growing bitter. He approached each role with a sense of duty, the same way he once approached the sea. And slowly, people began to notice. It wasn't until 1968, nearly 2 decades after his first screen credit, that opportunity finally caught up with perseverance. Hawaii Five-O debuted on CBS, and with it, Jack Lord was launched into homes across America. He wasn't just another actor anymore. He had become the face of primetime authority. But beneath the surface of this late-blooming fame, Jack carried something else. The burden of a past he rarely spoke of, a chapter marked by love, separation, and loss. And in that hidden chapter, we find a young sailor, a shipboard romance, and a child whose brief life would leave a permanent shadow over Jack's soul. Before fame found him, Jack Lord lived a quieter story, one that unfolded far from Hollywood sound stages, aboard the steel decks of merchant vessels during wartime. It was there, amidst the ordered chaos of a post-war cruise, that a chance encounter would change the course of his life. Her name was Anne Willard, a refined young woman born in Paris and raised by a Brooklyn-born civil engineer. She was a guest aboard the ship where Jack served. He was in uniform, steady and handsome, with a presence that stood out even in the crowded corridors of the liner. For Anne, it was love at first glance. And for Jack, the feeling was mutual. Their whirlwind courtship led swiftly to marriage. The exact year remains lost to history. Some say it was 1942, others 1944. A few even claim they wed aboard the very ship where they first met, with the captain presiding over their vows. What is certain is that the two were drawn together by an unlikely romance in an uncertain world, clinging to each other in the aftermath of global conflict. But the fairy tale was short-lived. Duty called again, and Jack returned to service just months after the wedding. While he was away, and discovered she was expecting. With no family of her own in the United States and Jack still abroad, she returned to France to give birth and raise the child under her parents' care. She named the boy after his father. In her letters to Jack, she hinted at doubts about the distance, the silence, the life she now faced alone. And in time, those doubts solidified into a request for divorce. For reasons never fully explained, Jack saw his son only once. Whether it was distance, wartime logistics, or emotional detachment, the result was the same, and the child remained in France, while Jack returned to the US to build a new life. In interviews, he would later mention neither of them. And yet, those who knew him best would come to understand that their absence weighed heavily on his heart. Tragedy struck just before the boy's 13th birthday. His death, like much of his life, remains veiled in uncertainty. Some believe he succumbed to a lingering illness, perhaps hepatitis. Others suggest he drowned during a violent storm. There are reports that a series of hurricanes had swept through the region at the time, causing multiple fatalities. The truth, like so much of Jack's early personal life, is known only in fragments. But what remains unmistakable is the grief. Jack Lord, who commanded every camera he faced, never spoke publicly about the child he lost. It was a sorrow he carried in silence, tucked away beneath layers of privacy and control. Perhaps that grief shaped the man he later became, a figure of resolve, of caution, of tightly guarded emotions. Or perhaps it simply deepened his appreciation for the woman who would one day stand by his side, not as a distant memory, but as a lifelong companion. And it was with Marie Dinard, a fiercely independent fashion designer, that Jack would find not just love, but sanctuary. A relationship that began not with stardom, but with a shared love for a house made of stone. In an industry where relationships often flickered and faded under the glare of fame, the love between Jack Lord and Marie Dinard was something altogether different, quiet, enduring, and fiercely protective. Their story began not on a film set or at a lavish party, but with a house. A house made of stone nestled in the countryside of upstate New York. Jack had been visiting his brother and indulging his passion for photography when he first saw it. The structure captivated him, its timeless elegance echoing something familiar from his own past. Determined to make it his, he attempted to contact the owner. That owner was Marie Dinard. Marie was no ordinary landowner. She was a successful fashion designer, known for her keen eye, strong will, and financial independence. At the time, she was living in her Manhattan apartment and had no intention of parting with her beloved house. Jack's letters and calls initially went unanswered, but in one of his notes, he wrote with a sailor's frankness, "Madam, I'm a sailor. I have never written any letter, but I have spent all of my leave trying to reach you." The honesty in his words touched something in her. She agreed to meet him. When she opened the door and saw Jack standing there, tall, broad-chested, and with an intensity that could not be ignored, she was intrigued. They spent the day talking, learning about one another, the hours slipping past unnoticed. Something genuine passed between them, something rare. Despite a 15-year age difference and Marie's considerable independence, a romance quietly began to blossom. Jack soon made up his mind. He would propose. The plan was to ask for her hand during dinner at El Faro, a cozy Spanish restaurant in Greenwich Village. Martini in hand, he waited for the right moment. But just as he was about to speak, actor Jack Elam wandered in, clapped him on the back, and started a boisterous conversation. The timing was awkward, but Jack pressed on. When Marie mentioned an upcoming trip to Spain, he leaned in. "I want to move to the West Coast," he told her, "and I want you to come with me." She paused, smiled, and asked, "Are you proposing?" He answered yes. And without hesitation, she said, "Then I accept." They married on January 17th, 1949, and moved into Marie's New York apartment that same week. But they never celebrated their wedding anniversary. Instead, they marked the day they first met, believing that was the moment their true journey began. From that point on, Marie became Jack's anchor. She gave up her thriving career in fashion to support him, not as a passive spouse, but as an active, strategic partner in his rising career. It was Marie who helped manage his image, organized his schedule, and provided a serene home life that allowed him to focus entirely on his work. Friends and co-stars often remarked on how much Jack adored her. He spoke often and proudly of her poise, her cooking, her warmth. He would beam as he said, "Meeting her made all the difference. I might have sailed on merchant ships for the rest of my life. She gave my life a purpose." For a man who had known loss, uncertainty, and public scrutiny, Marie offered something rare: peace. And it was this inner peace that allowed Jack to fully embrace the role that would define him. But with success came peculiar habits, quiet routines, and a steadfast dedication to his craft. By the time Hawaii Five-0 premiered in 1968, Jack Lord was nearly 50 years old, an age by which many actors begin to fade from leading roles. But for Jack, it was the beginning of an unexpected second act. As Steve McGarrett, the unflinching head of Hawaii's fictional state police, he brought an air of gravitas that few could match. His piercing gaze, clipped diction, and quiet intensity made him more than a television character. He became an institution. The series ran for 12 seasons, making it one of the longest-running police procedurals of its era, and turning Jack into a household name. But behind the scenes, he was anything but typical. Co-stars often described Jack as unusual, but always with a touch of fondness. Cam Fong, who portrayed Detective Chin Ho Kelly, once recalled how Jack would retreat to a quiet corner between scenes and listen to classical music. It wasn't just background noise, it was ritual. That music, with its structure and order, seemed to soothe him, to center him for the next take. Others remembered his insistence on taking a full shower before filming, no matter how tight the schedule. The crew learned to accommodate his rhythms, recognizing that his eccentricities were simply part of his process. James MacArthur, who played the beloved Danno, spoke of Jack's fastidious grooming habits. He would spend long stretches in the makeup chair, not for vanity, but to ensure that every strand of hair, every crease in his collar, was just right. He approached his appearance with the same precision he brought to his performances. Nothing was left to chance. On set, he memorized every line, rehearsed meticulously, and expected the same level of commitment from those around him. Some found his intensity difficult. Others admired it. But none could deny his discipline. He was the first to arrive, the last to leave, and the heartbeat of the production. He took personal interest in the writing, occasionally contributing to scripts, and even directed several episodes himself. Jack didn't just act in Hawaii Five-0, he shaped it. He understood the cultural responsibility of filming in Hawaii and worked to portray the islands with dignity and respect, often hiring local talent and pushing for authentic storylines. The show's success brought him accolades, including a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. But fame, for Jack, was never the goal. He rarely attended parties or Hollywood gatherings. He turned down countless interviews and endorsements. What mattered to him was the work and Marie. The more popular the show became, the more Jack retreated from the spotlight. He had spent years clawing his way up in Hollywood, and now that the cameras had found him, he handled fame with caution. He protected his private life fiercely, refusing to let it be consumed by publicity. For Jack Lord, Hawaii Five-0 was a role, not a lifestyle. Once the director called cut, he left Steve McGarrett behind and returned home to a quieter world. Yet behind the serenity of that home, there lingered a private ache, an emptiness neither awards nor acclaim could fill. And as the years passed, thoughts of fatherhood returned, not with urgency, but with a gentle, unspoken longing. Jack Lord had always carried a tenderness for children, a side of him rarely seen in the stern-eyed detective he portrayed. Those who worked closely with him noticed how he softened in their presence, how his voice lost its edge and his demeanor warmed. Cam Fong, his longtime Hawaii Five-0 co-star, once remarked how Jack, so often intense and reserved, would suddenly become playful and animated when children visited the set. It was a glimpse of the father he might have been, had life unfolded differently. When Jack married Marie Dinard, children were not part of their plan. Early in their marriage, they had agreed to pour their energy into building his career. Marie had already achieved considerable success on her own, and she chose to leave her fashion empire behind to support Jack's rising ambitions. Together, they became a team, measured, strategic, unwavering. In many ways, the absence of children allowed them to remain closely bound, their lives moving in perfect rhythm. Yet as Jack's fame grew and his days became filled with the weight of leadership, on screen and off, something began to shift. Friends say the couple started to revisit the question they had long set aside. There were quiet conversations, not of regret, but of wondering. What if? What would their home feel like with the echo of small footsteps, the sound of laughter in the halls? Some sources suggest that Marie may have experienced a miscarriage, though she never spoke of it publicly. The couple remained characteristically silent about their private decisions. But there were signs. Jack, who so often kept his emotions guarded, would linger longer when children visited the set. He and Marie began spending more time at the beach, watching families play in the sand, their eyes following the joy of moments they had chosen to forego. Still, there was no bitterness in their decision, only a sense of quiet acceptance. They had one another, and that had always been enough. Marie remained his fiercest ally, managing not just his schedule but his well-being. She ensured the home was a sanctuary, free from the noise of the outside world. Jack, in turn, doted on her endlessly, cooking for her, bringing her flowers, praising her in interviews when he rarely mentioned anything else. Their life was measured not in milestones like school recitals or birthday parties, but in the consistency of their care for each other. They celebrated small things, the first snow of the season, the way the afternoon light fell on their lanai, a particularly good mango. They found meaning in simplicity, and in each other's company, they created a home that was deeply, unmistakably theirs. For nearly 5 decades, Jack and Marie lived without children, but not without purpose. Their love became their legacy, one shaped not by what was absent, but by what was unwavering. And as Jack's health began to falter, it was Marie who would rise once again, not just as wife, but as guardian of the man she had loved so completely. And so began the most private chapter of all, a retreat from the spotlight, where illness crept in quietly and devotion became a daily act of protection. As the sun began to set on Jack Lord's career, so too did he and Marie begin to withdraw from the public gaze. By the early 1980s, Hawaii Five-0 had completed its remarkable 12-season run, and Jack stepped away from the spotlight with the same control and dignity that had defined his on-screen persona. He did not chase guest roles, press interviews, or honorary awards. Instead, he and Marie turned inward, embracing a life of peace and privacy at their beachfront home in Kahala. For fans, it was as if Jack Lord had simply vanished. But behind that carefully drawn curtain, a quieter struggle had begun. Whispers started to emerge in the mid-1980s. Jack, once so quick-witted and commanding, had begun to forget familiar names. Locals in Honolulu reported seeing him sitting alone near the Kahala Mall, sometimes disoriented, seemingly unaware of his surroundings. Rumors circulated that Marie had taken to paying taxi drivers or neighbors to gently escort him home. Though no official diagnosis was ever made public, speculation mounted that Jack was facing the slow, cruel decline of Alzheimer's disease. Marie, true to form, said nothing. Even when longtime friend and Hawaii Five-0 co-star James MacArthur visited the island and shared lunch with Marie, Jack did not join them. When asked about her husband, Marie smiled and insisted he was well. She deflected, shifted the conversation, and maintained the illusion of normalcy with remarkable grace. But those who had known Jack well began to understand the truth. His absence spoke louder than words. For Marie, denial wasn't born of illusion, it was a shield. She understood how the world often reacted to vulnerability, especially in celebrities who had once embodied strength. She had built her life with Jack on privacy and purpose, and now, in his most delicate years, she would not allow the world to see him diminished. She protected him fiercely, even as the effort took its toll on her own health. Marie was aging too, and yet she remained devoted. Former colleagues recalled seeing her frail, unsteady on her feet, walking slowly to the front door of their condominium just to close it, shielding Jack from view. Even in her twilight years, she stood guard. What makes their final years so striking is how little is known. In an era when the press hounded stars into their later years, Jack and Marie succeeded in disappearing almost entirely. Only one paparazzi photo of them exists from that period, a grainy image taken from a respectful distance of the two sitting side by side near the sea. It captures a sense of stillness, not sadness, as if, after all the roles and rehearsals, they had finally arrived at something real. For nearly 2 decades after retiring, Jack Lord lived in quiet retreat. No public appearances, no interviews, no curtain calls, only Marie and the slow passage of time. And when that time finally ran out, it was Marie who stepped forward, not as a grieving widow, but as the final guardian of his memory, determined to preserve the man she had known best. On January 21st, 1998, Jack Lord passed away at his Honolulu home. He was 77 years old. The world that had once watched him command the screen received the news quietly. There was no grand announcement, no funeral broadcast, no parade of celebrities offering eulogies. True to the life he had built with Marie, his farewell was simple, private, and deeply personal. His ashes were scattered in the Hawaiian waters he so loved, an intimate tribute to a man whose greatest joys were found far from the cameras. Marie, ever composed, released a brief and elegant statement. Jack loved acting and he loved these islands, she wrote. Through all his years, he was blessed with kindness and affection and the support of many fans and friends. He always appreciated that and never forgot it. In those few words, she honored not only the actor, but the man she had cherished for nearly 5 decades. It was a farewell that echoed the quiet strength of the life they had lived together, one of devotion, dignity, and purpose. For the years that followed, Marie remained the steward of Jack's memory. Though she was already well into her 90s when he passed, she maintained their home and their shared legacy with unwavering dedication. Friends and neighbors recalled how she still kept Jack's artwork displayed throughout their condominium. Maritime scenes, Hawaiian landscapes, and tender sketches that revealed the gentler sides of a man so often remembered for his stern roles. She spoke rarely to the press, but continued to support the charitable causes they had both championed. When asked about Jack, she would smile, share a gentle memory, and return to her quiet life. There was no need for embellishment. Their love had never been about spectacle. It had been about the small, steady acts of care, the way he cooked for her, the poems he wrote in the sand, the way she protected his legacy until the very end. On October 13th, 2005, Marie passed away at the age of 100. Her long life had been lived not in the limelight, but in quiet partnership with a man whose fame never eclipsed their bond. Together, they had built something rare in Hollywood, a marriage that endured not because of public admiration, but in spite of it. Though their condominium eventually sold and their names slipped from the headlines, those who knew them remembered the Lords not just for Jack's work on screen, but for the love they shared off of it. A love that weathered grief, guarded privacy, and grew stronger with time. Even in passing, Marie made sure Jack's legacy endured with grace. No tabloid scandals, no tell-all books, just the memory of a man who gave his all to a single role, and everything else to the woman who stood beside him. But the story doesn't end there. Jack Lord's impact went beyond performance, beyond even love. His generosity, quiet and sustained, continues to ripple through the islands he called home. Though Jack Lord stepped away from the spotlight, he and Marie never turned their backs on the world. In fact, much of their later life was quietly devoted to giving back. At the time of Jack's passing in 1998, his net worth was estimated at $40 million, an impressive sum for any actor, let alone one who had lived so modestly. Adjusted for today, that would be closer to $60 million. But what made that figure remarkable was not how much they had, but how they chose to use it. The Lords channeled their fortune into the communities they loved most, especially the islands of Hawaii. They established the Jack and Marie Lord Fund at the Hawaii Community Foundation, a philanthropic trust that continues to support cultural preservation, education, and the arts. The Honolulu Academy of Arts became one of the fund's many beneficiaries, along with local hospitals and educational institutions. Their donations helped fund art education programs, medical research, and initiatives aimed at preserving traditional Hawaiian crafts and language, an enduring gift to the people and the land they had adopted as their home. In life, Jack was a man of structure and dignity. His philanthropy reflected those same values. There were no headlines, no awards sought for charitable work. The giving was quiet, intentional, and far-reaching. It was, perhaps, the most authentic expression of the man who had once painted serene seascapes and memorized his lines to perfection. He believed in beauty, in discipline, and in legacy, not the kind found in fame, but the kind that lasts long after the spotlight has dimmed. And yet, even as their generosity shaped the island's future, the Lord residents, once a symbol of their shared life, began to fade from memory. Their home was a luxurious 3,500 square foot condominium at the Kahala Beach Apartments, just steps from the ocean. Purchased in 1970, at the height of Hawaii Five-O's success, it had been their refuge for over 3 decades. Decorated in more mid-century tones, it bore all the marks of Marie's design sensibility. Pumpkin-colored cabinets, avocado green carpeting, white painted walls adorned with maritime and island-themed art, some painted by Jack himself. It was a space built for living, not for showing off. Stylish, but comfortable. Grand, but lived in. Beyond their personal unit, they owned several other apartments within the complex. Some were rented out. Another served as the business office for their company, Lord and Lady Enterprises. Marie managed the enterprise with a precision that mirrored Jack's own professional habits. She handled contracts, bookings, and public relations from that modest office just a few doors down from their home. But after Marie's death in 2005, the property lingered on the market. Though originally listed at $2 million, some reports suggest even higher. It failed to attract a buyer. Time had passed. Tastes had changed. The once iconic residence was no longer seen as fashionable, and the space, so filled with memory and character, was eventually sold in 2008 for just $800,000. And yet, the faded walls and sun-warmed lanai told a quiet story. One of 2 people who lived not for flash, but for meaning. A couple who left behind not just a fortune, but a legacy rooted in generosity, restraint, and love. And in that legacy, perhaps we find the clearest reflection of Jack Lord himself, not just the face of a famous detective, but a man shaped by loss, by loyalty, and by the rarest kind of devotion. Jack Lord will forever be remembered by many as the stone-faced detective who brought criminals to justice beneath the swaying palms of Hawaii. But the real man behind Steve McGarrett was more complex, more private, and ultimately more human than the image etched into television history. He was not just an actor, but a sailor, a painter, a husband, and a man who carried both triumph and sorrow in equal measure. His life was defined not by scandal, but by silence. Not by extravagance, but by elegance. From his humble beginnings in Brooklyn to his years in the Merchant Marine, from the pain of losing a son to the peace he found with Marie, Jack's story unfolded like a carefully painted canvas, layered, intentional, and full of depth. He rose through Hollywood not with brash ambition, but with quiet persistence, shaping a career that peaked late but left an indelible mark. Yet it was his partnership with Marie Dinard that gave his life its truest meaning. Together, they crafted a world that was both secluded and sincere, a world in which fame was secondary to loyalty, and where love was measured not in grand gestures, but in the daily act of care. In an industry often driven by ego and fleeting attention, their devotion stood as a rare and enduring example. Even as age and illness took their toll, Jack remained sheltered by the woman who had once opened a door to him and never closed it again. Marie's commitment to protecting Jack's dignity, even in his most vulnerable years, is as much a part of his legacy as any award or performance. Her quiet refusal to let the world see him diminished was not denial. It was love in its most steadfast form. And in the years since their passing, the echo of that love has not faded. It lingers in the charitable foundations they established, in the art Jack left behind, and in the still waters off Kahala Beach, where his ashes were scattered. Though their home may now belong to someone else, and their names may no longer appear in the headlines, their impact remains in Hawaii, in Hollywood, and in the hearts of those who remember them. Jack Lord once said, "I think my whole life has been an effort to become the man she thought I was." And perhaps he did. Not in front of a camera, but behind closed doors in the quiet moments shared with the one person who saw him completely. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's golden era.